Hello everyone, I'm Brian Whipker, Extension Floriculturalist at NC State University. In this e-GRO University webinar, we're going to look at 4 ideas that you can use with your spring crops. So let's get started. I want to start off with first thanking Find Americas for sponsoring this e-GRO University webinar series. So without their help, we would not be offering the webinar. So thanks to them for doing that. So in today's outline, I'm going to talk about 4 main ideas that you can use with PGRs for your spring crops. So I'm going to cheat a little. First, I'm going to talk about some PGR resources and then cover each one of these tips from growth promotion, growth control, checking growth, and then color enhancement. So let's start off with the preface. We're looking here at PGR resources. So what's new and available that you can use with your operation? So recently we just published the 2017-18 Plant Growth Regulator Guide for annuals. I'm on for the odd years, so that's why this one's new this year. And then in the even years, my colleague Joyce Latimer at Virginia Tech does the perennial guide. And so she'll come out with a new guide next year in the first of the year in 2018. So you can get it as a download from the Find Americas website, or if you've got the Grower Talks magazine, you should have already received it in the mail. In addition, if you're trying to mix PGRs, you know what rate you want to use, but then you're saying, okay, this time I have 10 gallons to mix versus 25. The PGR Mix Master would work great. Brian Krug worked with Find Americas and updated this PGR Mix Master that he came up with. It's available for a free download for your use of your phone. And so you basically select the PGR, how many gallons and the parts per million you want to mix. It will then tell you how many gallons of water and how many milliliters or ounces of water that you are of the chemical you need to add to do your mixing. So it's right there on your phone. If you're in the greenhouse, it makes it easy to do. How do you get it? You can download it from the e-GRO.org website, look up at the tab on different apps, and it's a free download at that point that you can get it. This is version 2 of the earlier one that he had done. So it's free. It's a great download to end up using. So let's start talking about some of the tips to consider for this spring's production. And the first thing I want to talk about is enhancing plant growth. So how can you increase overall plant growth? And so a lot of times we'll see a stunted plant. You see this mom here that got an overdose of plant growth regulator. So it's gnarly, it's small. How do we get more growth coming up on that plant? And so we're trying to get it back up to a full-size plant. So a lot of factors will play a part in causing the stall, insufficient fertilization, suboptimal temperatures, cold growing conditions, but primarily what we see the problem that goes on is a plant growth regulator overdose. So an anti-gibberellin PGR was applied, it was too high of a rate, and basically it stalled the plant growth occurring with that plant. And so we want to now stimulate new growth and get it to grow a little higher. So how do we do that? The answer is either of 2 chemicals, Fresco or Fascination. They're both growth promoters, and that's because they're a combination of 6GA or 6BA and GA4+7. And so it's a nice combination of these two chemicals that help on overall growth. And so it's a nice PGR to end up using. There is another product on the market that's just a straight GA3 that you have a little less margin of an error, and it's recommended. I would rather see people use a Fresco or Fascination type combination instead to try to. It helps eliminate some overdose possibilities. This is a better bet, and this is what most growers are using. So how do you use it to enhance growth? You can apply the Fresco Fascination products as either foliar spray, a drench, or chemigation. On the label, the starting rates are 1 to 5 parts per million. So begin with the lower range. 1 to 3 is probably the best. Make your application, see if you stimulate the growth. Give it 7 days, and if not, come back in with the second application. On that second application, many times growers will give a half rate. So what you're trying to do is you're easing your foot off the brake and punching the accelerator, and you only want to tap it down lightly to start growing versus getting it too high and shoot the growth up, because then you're going to have too much stretch going on, opposite of what situation you had, because that's the reason why you use this product. And so in most cases, the 1 to 5 part per million range does work. There are differences in cultivars, and of course there's differences in species, so you might have to do a little playing around and have your own trial to try to determine some of these optimal rates. And of course the amount of lockup that might be happening due to the PGR that you applied is also going to affect that rate. So there's a lot of variables there. You're just going to have to kind of get a system down, and then you can go from there to get your rates right. So here's some work we did looking at Fresco's foliar sprays on begonia, and you can see the untreated control on the far left versus applying Fresco and the enhancement of growth that went on. So we stimulated more stretch of that plant enlargement, and that's what we're looking at with the product. The same thing going on here with the yellow tiger viola. That's here, so you can get some more growth control. So is a little of a good thing good? Yes. Is a lot of a good thing bad? Well, yes, it is also. So you can see here, this is just a grower trial, and they were looking at how effective it was. They did not treat the one on the left, and they overdosed on purpose the one on the right. And you can see you got all that extra stimulation that's there. So too high of a rates will cause the plant to stretch. And you can see that same plant then a little later with the stretch that's there under the flowers. So it did bloom, it did look okay, but with that stretch, those flower stalks are quite weak, and so that's an undesirable characteristic. Along with, it's going to be tougher to ship a product like that, and it's very open and airy. So that was a little too much on the high end. Also, you can have more yellowing of the growth occurring if you have too high of a rate and get that stretch occurring on that plant. So if you have gone with excessive rates and you're getting the stretch, you can come back in and apply another anti-gibberellin plant growth regulator such as Piccolo 10XC to check that growth to stop it from growing. So it's like throwing one then another on it if you start getting into trouble. So moderation is the key to make things work. Also, we have seen on poinsettias that drenches might be more effective than foliar sprays. There was a fascination trial a few years ago that I was looking at, and there was some distortion that did occur with the foliar spray. In addition, with a foliar spray of either product, there's a chance that you can have some bleaching of the red bracts to more dusty, pinky coloration. So you need to do some testing to see what's appropriate. We did not see any phytotoxicity issues when we were looking at 1 to 3 parts per million of Fresco as a drench. And so never do you want to go up on any of these products up to 10 parts per million. You're just going to stimulate too much growth. So the sweet spot is 1 to 5 parts per million to get things done and to re-stimulate new growth occurring. So growth stimulation and enhancement is possible with both Fresco and fascination. You do need to have enough time that you can stimulate that growth. It's, if you apply it too late on a mom or too late on a poinsettia where it has a terminal flower, you're not going to get the additional growth. Now, you will on something that continually grows, it will occur, but not on something with a terminal flower. So timing is key to be able to get that plant to grow the way that you want to. So now let's shift gears to liner soaks. So how can liner soaks be used to control growth? So sometimes you have excessive growth of either a combination basket or a particular plant. Liner soaks might be the answer to overcome this excessive growth that we're looking at. So what are we talking about? We're talking about taking the plug trays and submerging the root systems, so basically halfway up the side of that plug cell into a PGR solution. So here we just have a plastic container. You would just go to one of the home improvement stores and get like one of the plastic containers that might fit under your bed. So it's about the size of a flat, and you can have a flat bottom on it, and then basically insert the whole flat in there. And ideally, you want that nutrients or that solution, the PGR solution, to come up halfway over the side or up the side of that plug. and then that will do it. And then if you have it so you can put a lid on top, you could save the solution if you haven't used it up yet and you're going to test or treat additional plants the following day. So when we're looking at a liner soak, it's very similar to a substrate application. So once it's applied to the soil, through the xylem, you have it readily picked up and transported throughout the plant to control growth. Because many of and that's represented by the green arrows in the slide. And many of these PGRs, while they are transported easily in the xylem, the green arrows, they are not transported very easily through the phloem. And that would represent going out of the leaf, and that's the red arrows. And so consequently, with a substrate application, you do get more even uptake, and therefore you have more consistent control along that whole plant. So it doesn't matter if it's a liner soak or a substrate application, that's what's going to end up happening. So what are the key steps for this system? You need to have the plugs to the stage of where they need to be irrigated. They need to be a little on the dry side. So depending on your weather conditions, don't irrigate them the day before or 2 days before. So they're not bone dry, but they're at the stage of needing an application, and that will help absorb the solution up into the liner. And so that's the key for what needs to go on. If you have a dry plug, because it is dry, it's going to absorb that solution in the plug itself, and so you have about 5x of the uptake compared to a wet solution, and so a wet plug. And so if you don't do it to a dry plug, you're not going to have enough absorption and have enough control going on with that plant. Here's some work that Alan Hammer did earlier, looking at the control plant on the left, these Easy Way blue petunias, and then he had the plant in the middle that was at the dry side, so it took it up, versus one that was watered prior to the PGR application. That's the one on the right. And you can actually see that you stimulated growth, and you will see that at very, very low concentrations. You can stimulate growth on some of these plants. So the key there is to get growth control, it has to be on the dry side, and that's what this illustrates very well. So how long does it take to have uptake occur? Really about 2 minutes. Now, 5 minutes, there's an additional amount, that's that dark blue part on that cylinder that's on the right, but you get most of your uptake after about 2 minutes of solution. So that's a good targeting length to have that root system submerged in that PGR solution. So I said earlier, you want that solution to come up halfway up the side of the plug, and most of the roots, keep in mind, are at the bottom of that plug, so you're having excellent root contact going on. The flexibility is there as far as transplanting and treatment, so ideally you can do it 2 hours and treat them, hold 2 hours and apply it. I like the concept of doing it the day before, so that gets your treatment done, and then you pass the REI that any of these chemicals would have, and then you can go ahead and do the transplant of these plugs into the soil. So here's some work that Alan Hammer did also, the control on the left, looking at the same bonsai soak, and that the one in the middle was planted and then watered in after 10 minutes after being treated versus 2 hours. And you can see there that watering it in right after you give it the PGR liner soak, it stimulated growth. So why is that the case? And the reason for that is because you basically flushed out the PGR from the root zone. That's what you ended up doing. So you didn't get any control. You wasted your money. And the plant on the far right, that 2 hours was long enough that you had sufficient uptake starting to occur, and you got your growth control that you're wanting. So do not just transplant them as soon as you treat them and water them in. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you planned on. Also, cutting age matters. If the plug is not well enough rooted, so it's early in the production cycle, you're going to have overregulation of that plug. And so poorly rooted cuttings don't work as well. You need to get that root system on those plugs before you do any transplanting or treatment of those plugs. So we did say we need to use the dry liner soak protocol. So irrigate the plugs like 24 hours prior, especially if it's sunny. It might take 48 hours prior if it's cloudy weather for you. And then that evens up the moisture level, let it dry down, and then it's at the point of needing a normal irrigation, and I would soak it for 2 minutes and you'll get pretty darn good results. So rates do vary by plant vigor and cultivar, so you are going to have to play around with rates. Here's some guidelines that you could consider. Right now only Piccolo's registered, and so if you were in the north, you're looking at really between 0.5 and 4 parts per million, the south 2 to 8, and maybe up to 16 parts per million. We have played around with rates on Uniconazole and Top Floor. They're there, but they're not registered at this point. And so Piccolo is the main one that has registration. So here's some work that we did with Piccolo 10XC. You can see with this Argyranthemum, there was not a lot of growth control that went on. Here's the highlight of the 2 higher rates. You can see there's a little moderation that did go on, but it probably is going to need a little higher rate than what we used. Coleus, you started moderating growth between 8 and 12 part per million, and that worked pretty well. On fuchsia, this particular variety was very responsive. 4 part per million, or maybe more ideally targeting 2 part per million, would give you the type of height control that you want. Here's a close-up, basically about a week earlier. You can see the openness of the untreated versus 4 part per million has controlled growth on that plant. And here's just another angle looking at the stretch that occurred. So you're controlling some of that excess stretch also with that fuchsia plant by using this particular treatment. So this one to show that even though we nailed it as far as growth control is concerned, we did get pretty good flower power. And you can see that there on that plant, even at these excessive rates at 12 part per million. Nero Ipomea, it did work, it did control it, but this particular cultivar doesn't need a lot of growth control. And so we had the plugs, we decided we would end up testing it. Scabola also is another plant that's very responsive to any drench applications. Probably looking at closer to about the 2 part per million would be optimal. And you can see how it's changed the architecture of that plant. And so here's just a close-up. Now in 2 weeks, the plant on the right had pretty good flower power coming. This was just an earlier photograph of where things stood. We also played around with Florel liner soaks. It's not registered at this point, but we can get growth control also occurring at the plant. And we had the idea from a phone call of doing diminizide, because diminizide does not work as a drench because it's tied up with the soil. But in the case of a liner soak, the roots are at the outside of the root cell, and we had direct contact, and we in fact did get root activity if you ended up applying it to the roots. But the bottom line is cost effectiveness. It's not that cost effective as of a treatment. You would be better off using a Pacload Betrazole product, and probably it would be half the price. So anyway, it's neat to do the research, but the practicality is not there because of cost, and it's not registered at this point either. Here's some work from my colleague Joyce Latimer at Virginia Tech looking at Russian sage. And you can see that really towards the center there, 4 to 6 parts per million, you started to get some growth control of those plugs. If you wanted a compact plant, that's an avenue to look at. So pre-plant liner soaks work very well to control especially those vigorous plants that are growing. So if you give it the application, and you might just say, I'm going to do a half rate versus full season long application, and then you can just play it by ear based on the weather conditions you have. And that might be a better approach for up north. Cost-wise, it's very cost-effective to treat a large number of plants. So you might want to consider doing a trial to try to determine some of the optimal rates for your plants in your location. So something to consider. So now let's look at checking growth. So if you have late season stretch, can you use a PGR to kind of check that growth? And so we did an experiment with bubblegum. If anyone's grown bubblegum, you know that it is a very, very aggressive plant. And this is the stage of where we made the application. And so this is after the application, 2 weeks of growth, that you can see the plant on the upper left had no PGRs, kind of open, a little control there on the upper right, and then more control with the lower plant in the middle. So you can see 4 part per million versus 2, that you had significant differences in plant growth. Here's at 5 weeks, and you can see that, you know, the untreated control is pretty open. There's a little more growth control with the 2 part per million, and then the 4 part per million piccolo did a nice job holding the plants back. So it's probably an overall winner that we're looking at. Now here what we did is we applied one application and then a second one 2 weeks later. And you can see here that second application did do a nice job of really condensing down those plants a little further. So the one in the bottom had 2 applications, a piccolo 10XC at 4 part per million. Looks pretty nice. So here's just another comparison so you can see across the board. And so the 2X applications seem to be a little better. And just look at the plants that got the piccolo treatment. They're more compact. You don't have that ranginess. You don't have the leaf greenness in there. So it just is a nice plant with a nice look to it. And that's what we're talking about for doing this late season drench. So for paclobutryzoles, probably you're looking at targeting for anything you're doing between 1 and 4 part per million. If you're going to try a test in your own using a uniconazole fluoroprimadol, you better do a quarter to half of those rates. That's where the sweet spot really is. There is more root activity out of fluoroprimadol and uniconazole, so you need to lower the rates, and then you just need to do a cost comparison to see which was your cheapest option. The other advantage that goes along with drenches is that they have less effect of delaying flowering than sprays. So it works pretty well. And so if you are going to do a drench, you have to basically plan ahead and do a preventive drench, and that will also improve your overall flower power. So it's something to consider. It worked very well in our trials. Just another thing to keep in mind, work that Jim Barrett did at University of Florida. He did a lot of 0.1 part per million paclo on poinsettias 2 weeks, and it really held the poinsettias for about 2 weeks without having a negative effect on the bracts size. In his experiments, I think he did about three applications, and he was able to control most of the growth of the poinsettias. So that low dose would be something to consider if you're getting into a retail setting and you're trying to slow down that growth. There's also a C-Pro retail cocktail that they suggested a few years back for annuals, a foliar spray of ARES at 4 to 8, plus B9 at 1250 to 2500. Perennials, the rates are slightly higher. They found it was safe on most plants and gave about 1 to 3 weeks of hold, and then it wears off in the garden because both of those are fairly soft chemicals. So another option for controlling late season problems of stretch. So the fourth topic that we're going to look at then is color enhancement. Can we change coloration with the use of the PGR? And the answer, of course, is yes. So here's a zonal geranium. You can see the banding being more pronounced because we use the plant growth regulator on that plant. In addition, on some of our trials, we noticed on these red coleus that the untreated was light red. They turned into more of a dark red with the use of 20 part per million piccolo 10XC. So you can get some enhancement of leaf color. It's a little tougher to see in this photograph because blues are just a bear. Light blues are really a bear to get photographed, but the untreated control is the upper left, and then you see a piccolo and a top floor application. And in comparison, those two were darker blue in coloration, and it worked very well. It can work very well for enhancing that growth. Now, on plumbago, I would rather see you use we're not at registration yet, but collate drenches work much better of giving the growth control you wanted. But the point here is some PGRs will enhance that coloration of both flowers and the leaves. So to get anything done, you got to have people help you. And so want to thank our research supporters, Find America's Proven Winners, Doom and Orange. We've been doing a large tobacco study, so want to thank the North Carolina Tobacco Foundation, Substrates from Oldcastle and SunGrow, and financial support from the American Floral Endowment, HRI, and the Fred C. Klockner Foundation. So one more shout out to Find Americas for sponsoring the webinar. We thank you for doing that. And with that, I am done with the presentation. So hopefully that gave you some information that you can use this spring in your operation.